author of many, many articles and many books. But Tim, Glenn Reynolds, to those of us who live in the blogosphere, which is frankly where I spend most of my days for the better part of 10 years, I don't think a day has gone by, or very few days, that I haven't gone to Professor Reynolds' wonderful website called Instapundit on the internet at instapundit.com. Professor Reynolds, welcome to today's issues.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You have written a number of articles, but a couple of broadsides I have in front of me, one called the K-12 Implosion and one called the Higher Education Bubble. I wanted to ask you about this last one, the higher education bubble. You say there's a crisis coming, which really may be upon us in American higher education. What's that all about?
Well, the core problem is that the cost of higher education has been increasing at several times the rate of inflation, or several times the rate of the growth in incomes for families. And as a result, people have been making up the difference with debt, and now it's reached the point where you can't afford to do that anymore, where people are being crippled by student loan debt, and where further increases in tuition aren't sustainable. And there's a graph in the book, in fact, that compares the growth of tuition to medical care and to the housing bubble, and it dwarfs both of them. And, you know, as I say at the beginning, there's a quote from the economist Herb Stein that something that can't go on forever won't. And something that can't go on forever is tuition prices rising much faster than people's incomes, and so it won't.
Well, I imagine, Glenn, that there are a chorus of people with college-age kids rising up and saying amen to what you just said, because they're on the consumer side of trying to help the kids get through college. Is this a structural problem, and is there a solution to it, or is this a bubble that's going to burst no matter what we do?
Well, it's going to burst no matter what we do, but there are different ways in which it can burst, and some of them will be more painful than others. One thing that's happening is people are, in fact, looking for other things to do. Some people are looking more seriously at skilled trades, because you can go to college and run up $100,000 in debt. And the New York Times had a story recently about a receptionist at an office in Atlanta making $37,000 a year with $100,000 worth of student loan debt. You could go become a welder or a plumber, and you can make $80,000 a year and not have any student loan debt, and that's really a better deal. Also, there's online schools which are cheaper. There are various certificates in areas mostly technical that employers will value, and there's just a lot of things you can do that don't require you to spend 4 or more often 5 or 6 years in college and a six-figure sum to get there.
We're talking to Glenn Harlan on the program today. We're discussing. He's got a couple of books out. They're short books, but they're very well. How would you describe them?
How would I describe? Well, they call them broadsides, and they're basically what they are is they're about like the length of an Atlantic Monthly feature article, but they're bound into a small paperback book.
Yeah.
And
they're a mini-me book.
Yeah, that's right. And they're nice because they let you really cut to the chase. A lot of people write those Atlantic Monthly feature articles, then they turn them into a book, and you say, I should have just read the magazine article. So you can kind of cut to the chase on this. But, I've got two, and the problems are similar. The higher education bubble is driven more by student loans and money people are laying directly out of their pockets to colleges. But if you look at the K-12 education, there's a similar situation of increasing amounts of money going in, but no more in the way of results coming out. And in fact, if you look at spending on education in constant dollars, so inflation's not a factor, we were spending about $1,200 a student in 1945, and by 2008 we were spending $10,500 per student.
Now,
so it's not better.
Yeah. By the way, these are excellent little books. They are small and easy to read, short and easy to read, but they're very potent with their information. One is on the higher education bubble, which I want to revisit in a few minutes that Ray just asked Glenn Harlan about, our guest, Harlan. And the second one is, Glenn Harlan Reynolds. Pardon me, Glenn. You do have a last name.
I like my middle name.
Your middle name is Harlan, so it's a good middle name. Reynolds is Glenn's last name. The K-12 Implosion is the second one. And these books, these little books, are available. How do you get these?
They're easy to find at Amazon or from Encounter Books, which is the publisher.
Encounter Books. The K-12 implosion. Now, the amount of money in most states, isn't public education the make up the majority of the state budget?
It's typically the biggest or the second biggest line just about everywhere.
So I mean, it's prioritized. What I'm saying is, for people to say, "Oh, we don't spend enough money on education." Well, we do. It is at the top of the spending list in most states.
We've been spending more than each year for a long time, and yet the so-called National Assessment of Educational Process, which is a test of how students learn, has been flat.
Okay, why is that? Why is that?
Because we're wasting money. Basically, part of it is that if you look at where the money goes, it's gone to administrators more than to teachers. In fact, it's interesting, since 1950, the number of students in public schools increased by 96%.
Yep.
The number of administrators increased by 702%, so more than 7 times the increase in students. And those administrators not only aren't teaching anybody anything, they're usually creating paperwork for the teachers who actually do. However, they vote Democratic. And you really have to understand the public schools in part as sort of a vote farm for Democratic politicians, which is why to them the increase in expense and the bloat is not a bug but a feature.
Well, that's interesting. The K-12 implosion. So you say we're spending, but we got to have administrators.
You do, but we sure have a lot more of them than we used to, and it's not clear that they're really contributing very much.
So, but the bottom line is, your point is, I want to get to this, is that we're spending and this takes into account, the cost of living increases or whatever you call it over the years. So
this is constant dollars. This is holding everything equal so that inflation is not a factor. We're spending roughly 8 times as much per student as we did in 1945.
And the results, you're saying the results of that are that we're worse academically?
Well, we're not any better.
We're not any better. We're spending 8 times as much money.
There's a good chance that we're worse, honestly. I think in terms of a lot of things. If you every once in a while you'll see these articles where they go and look at a high school exam from the 1940s or from 100 years ago, and the kind of questions they're asked compared with the kinds that are asked now, and you can't help but feel that maybe things have gone downhill. But they didn't start giving the National Assessment of Educational Progress that long ago, so we can't compare that far back. But for what we can compare, we're basically flat.
Glenn, is there a connection between what is happening in the public schools and let's face it, the erosion of confidence in public schools and the explosion of the homeschooling movement across the country?
Yes, and what's really interesting about the homeschooling movement is summed up in a quote from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, where she says, "Homeschooling, it's not just for scary religious people anymore." And
that's good.
It is, and it's true. In fact, it's become very popular with hipsters here in New York, where I am at the moment, because the New York City public schools stink, and the hipsters want their kids to get a good education, and they're sort of into artsy, craftsy, do-it-yourself stuff in other ways. So a lot of them are deciding to homeschool their kids because if you live in New York, the other alternative is to send your kids to private schools that cost $20,000 or $30,000 per kid per year, and that's just too expensive.
The scary. What did she say?
Scary religious people.
The scary religious people. Okay.
So it's
and it's true. Here in the evangelical
religious people.
Well, we're part of the conservative evangelical world, Tim, and in our corner of the world, we've known about homeschooling for a long time. But really, Glenn, you're saying that the larger American population is discovering it as a viable alternative now.
Well, it is. It's going mainstream, and one of the interesting things I've been researching. The Encounter people said the response to these 2 broadsides was enough that I'm actually combining them into a longer book, and I've been researching things. Horace Mann was the sort of founder of public compulsory schools in America, but his kids were homeschooled.
Oh, interesting.
So
I didn't know that.
It was good enough for Horace Mann's kids. It's probably good enough for yours. And in a way, it's like everything else. Nobody but a parent is really willing to put the kind of investment into kids that gets top results.
Yeah, I don't get, I get a little tired of people, going after somebody else because they do something different than they do. You know what I'm saying? Even in the Christian community, oh, your kids go to public school, you must serve the devil.
Right.
Or your kids go to Christian school.
Nobody cares more than the parents, or should at least care more than the parents.
Or your kids
about
go
the
to
future.
Christian school. Don't you want them to be able to, deal in the real world? Or your kids homeschool. Why do you do that? So I mean, let's let each other have the freedom to pick
I
what's
think
best
that's
for
right.
our children.
I mean, I will tell you, my daughter wasn't homeschooled, but she came home one day in ninth grade from her public high school, and she said, I think I want to go to online school. And I was like, really? Why? And she said, because I've kept track of how we spent our time in school, and I was there for 8 hours, and we spent about 2.5 of it on actual school, and the rest was wasted. She'd had like a DARE rally and, that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And so she, in fact, did convince me eventually, and she went to online school with Kaplan Online College Prep. And the nice thing about that was that she, because her schedule was flexible, she was able to have a job, and she worked for a TV production company for 2 years. And she was frankly hanging out with highly achieving young adults instead of loser high school students, which I think was a lot better for her. I mean, people talk about socialization, but I think being in a high-level workplace is a lot better for a kid than being in a teenage jail with a bunch of slackers and dope smokers.
So, Glenn, how do you really feel?
Tell us what you really think.
We're talking to Glenn. You can send your emails and comments to Glenn Harlan Reynolds. Glenn Reynolds is our guest. He's written 2 books. One is called The K through 12 Implosion. The other one is called The Higher Education Bubble, published by Encounter Books. Glenn Harlan Reynolds is our guest. I said I wanted to get back to the. There's 2 things I want to ask you about. One about both of these. I keep seeing this appeal to the public to fund pre-K stuff. Glenn, and and this is where I guess I get sometimes a little bit intimidated by the professional educators who say this is going to benefit the student by getting them involved in pre-K, educational.
Younger and younger.
Yeah. 4-year-olds we're talking about here. And I'm thinking to myself, Glenn, you tell me maybe this is just a redneck reaction. I'm going, I don't care if they benefit.
Well,
4-year-old is too young to be going to public school every day, or any school except maybe a little preschool, for 3 hours or whatever. But I just don't see it. I don't see that. I see it's more healthy for them to stay home with their mom. Go ahead.
Here's the problem. If they stay home with their mom's not going to vote Democratic. And there's not much evidence that pre-K helps. The biggest pre-K program we've had is Head Start, and the research shows that Head Start produces a few benefits for a year or two after kids are in it, but by the time they're 9 or 10, there's no difference between them and similar kids who weren't in Head Start. So the odds are pre-K does nothing for kids. What pre-K does is it puts a whole bunch of people on the public payroll who are going to vote reliably Democratic.
You got it all figured out, huh,
I hate to sound so cynical, but that's really all it's about. It is all about a job farm for Democratic voters. So
you're saying that you may start them out sending them to 4-year-olds. That's what they're trying to get into school now. I'm just going, why don't you just have the baby and ship it on over from the nursery over to the school? If this is where we're going, if the younger is always beneficial, you know what I'm saying, to their intellectual development. I don't buy that. But
anybody who says that public schools are a place that fosters intellectual development are hopeless.
Okay.
So I'm sorry. I hate to say it, be so negative, but that's just the truth. I think that pre-K is a mistake. I think it's entirely political in nature, and I think that very few kids will benefit.
They catch up, don't they? I mean,
they
what I'm getting at here is, like I said, I'm just reacting as a regular person when I read that they want to start sending them to school at 4 years of age to start getting them ready for school. I'm going, I don't agree with that. You may say I'm stupid or whatever. Well, I just don't agree with that. But what I'm saying is, you're saying is that that you may say, let's say you start a kid at 4 years old or 5 years old, and you start another kid at 6 years old, you're saying the